Good afternoon and welcome to Tropical Plants at 53 degrees north. My name is Jeff and today I'm going to tackle a subject which I've been avoiding so far, and it's all about feeding orchids. So grab a coffee, put your feet up and get ready for a little bit of controversy. I've avoided it because there is so much written about feeding orchids on the blogs and the YouTube channels, and it is very, very confusing, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to clear the waters. I'm probably going to muddy them a little bit. As I've said before, I'm on a kind of a learning journey, and I hate that cliche, but this is new to me in as much as I've only really been looking into how to feed the orchids for the past few weeks. Even though I've had some of them from last year, I only had my new greenhouse from March, and it was a case of getting everything else right first. And the feed was something that as I imagine a lot of people will do actually, I went on YouTube, I watched some of the more experienced growers and I simply copied them, which, you know, how many of us have got time to dig into the science behind it? But I found myself with a bit of time, so I've spent a couple of hours digging into it. Now, clearly that isn't the same as having a PhD in, I don't know, whatever would cover that, biological science, I don't know, plant nutrition, whatever you get a PhD in for that subject. So clearly I'm not going to know what they know, but I've got a certain take on it, and I'm going to tell you what I'm up to with it, and what I've found out, and hopefully I won't get shot down. Hopefully people will be supportive and understand where I am on this journey of learning about orchid food and feeding orchids, and perhaps point me in the right direction if I've got something wrong in my thinking. I think when you're learning something, you do go through this process of, you're trying to assimilate something, and by talking about it, you probably clear a few things up in your mind. But I think it's only by discussing these things that you can get put right, and you can improve and move on to something better. So that's hopefully what this is going to be this afternoon. It's been a horrendous day, just the usual weather report. It's been a horrendous day, horrendous night, but now I don't know if you can see, we've got a little bit of sun just shining through. Just move back a bit just to demonstrate the sun. Just shining through the top of the greenhouse there. The rest of it is in shade, and that's definitely something I'm going to have to address. It's really nice to be in here now again after being stuck at the computer for a few hours trying to find out about orchid feed and reading papers and whatnot. So I think what I'll do is I've made a few notes actually as well, so if you hear a bit of rustling, you'll know what I'm doing, because I've got a few quotes from various sources. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to flip you around, point you to something much nicer to look at than me, and we're going to discuss orchid feed. Okay, so I'll tell you what I'll point you at to start with. Point you at this rather attractive cattleya over here, and we'll discuss some orchid food. So this is what my thinking, or how my thinking progressed, what I started with, and how it moved on. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, you might have seen my apples and my pears videos where the audio was horrendous because I was outside and I was a bit self-conscious because the window cleaners were out and they were looking at me strangely talking to a camera. But I've got this smart lav mic that I found that I bought in 2014, and I've had it in my inbox waiting to do something with it, and I've never actually got round to it up until now, so I'm glad I managed to find it. I hope it's improved the audio anyway. So, okay, orchid feed. So my first thoughts were, well, I've done a little bit of science, obviously as a teacher, and my degree was in science. And I know it's a misnomer that everybody uses, but I thought it's worth pointing out that we're not actually feeding orchids. We don't feed plants, even though we all say we do. I don't know if, I guess people are aware of this, but I thought it worth mentioning anyway. Plants feed themselves. That's what photosynthesis is. And what we're actually doing as part of photosynthesis, where they need light, they need water, they have some kind of a gas exchange, and they need some nutrients into the roots, and that's what we typically talk of as feeding the plants, but we're not actually feeding them. What we're doing is we're just supplying one of those raw materials, and then they create their own sugars in that process of photosynthesis. So okay, that's that cleared up. So we're not feeding them, we're providing nutrients. So my first thoughts were, okay, well, what do they get in the wild? Now I know we're in an artificial environment in a greenhouse, or when we've got it in a pot, and we need to try and recreate what goes on in the wild as best that we possibly can. So what happens in the wild? So a lot of these orchids, not all of them, I'm aware, I know Ed's told me this several times, Ed from Ed's Orchids. Oh, by the way, he sent me this, he gave me this fantastic, what is it, Phragmipedium Main's Worthy Eye, which was really, really kind of him. So I'm going to try and look after that and not kill it. I believe it needs somewhat, actually it probably needs a bit of water now. I believe this one is a land lover. I don't think it's an epiphytic one. I'm sure he'll correct me in the comments if I'm wrong there. But many orchids are epiphytic, and they're going to, they grow up on trees. Oh, here's another one that's not, I've just remembered. This one is a stone lover, Dendrobium kingianum. Never flowered for me yet. Well, it grows on stones and rocks, I understand. There's another word for that which I can't remember. So, okay, back to epiphytic. But regardless where they grow, they're going to get nutrients. It's not impossible, but it's practically impossible for them not to. So you imagine a plant up in a tree, so it gets rainwater. There's not going to be much dissolved in the rainwater as it comes down from the sky, but as soon as it hits something, then it's going to start dissolving things that it passes on the way. So it's going to, be running past bark, over mosses, over lichens. There's going to be innumerable amounts of bits and bobs from animals, from insects, from other plants, from droppings, from all sorts of things. So they're going to get some nutrients. And then I thought to myself, well, okay, they get the nutrients, but who's measuring the parts per million? Who's splitting things off? Who's supplying extra bits and extra elements to these nutrients? And the answer is nothing. Nobody's doing that. They get whatever goes past. Now that doesn't mean that in the wild, every single plant is really healthy and looking good, because when you go in the wild, they're very often not. They've got all sorts on them. They've got spots. They certainly wouldn't win an orchid show. They've got spots on them. They've got leaves falling off. They don't look perfect because they don't always get what they need. And the ones that do get what they need are the ones that thrive, and you probably have a colony of them there or thereabouts. The ones that don't get what they need may well die, and you might not get any more in that particular spot. So what does that tell me? Well, that tells me that yes, they need some nutrients. They're not going to get by with nothing whatsoever. They may photosynthesize, but not quite as well, because they're missing one of those raw elements. So I then moved on to thinking, well, okay, so they need food. Why not just give them a general purpose orchid feed? Is there any reason why that's such a bad thing? So I jumped on, oops, new mic's falling off, sorry about that. I jumped on Google, as everybody else does, and I did a little bit of research, and this is what I found. Many of the YouTubers in my little circle, or the ones that I'm following, are using a general purpose orchid feed, and they're also supplementing with calcium and magnesium. Nothing else, just calcium and magnesium. But why? Why are they supplementing with those two things? Well, my first thought was this is a case of groupthink. I don't know if you've heard of groupthink. I'll tell you a little story about it actually. So, groupthink is, I'll tell you a story in a minute, but groupthink is when a group of people come together and one of the so-called influencers that people look up to, and I really don't mean this in a disparaging way, just hear me out. So one of the people who is looked up to will go and say something and make some claims based on research or whatever. It might not be, might be an opinion, I don't know, and other people will follow that advice. It happens, in not just in orchid growing world, it happens everywhere, and I'm just as susceptible to it as everybody else, because you can't go spending days and days researching things. If the majority of people tell me to go to a certain shop to go and get something, then I'm going to go and get it. That's a kind of groupthink. If I jump on Amazon and I see that there's tons of 5-star reviews for a particular product as opposed to other products which are not getting good reviews, then of course I'm going to follow everybody's advice and go to the one with all the 5-star reviews. So it's not such a bad thing, but it can lead to problems. So here's a little story. Now this isn't really groupthink, but you can see where it's linked and how it's related. So this young lady, let's say she's about 17, 18, young lady. Her mother's taught her how to cook. I don't want to be sexist here. Might be a young man. Maybe his dad taught him to cook. But I'll stick with the young lady or I'll get confused. So when she's cooking, and her mum was there in the kitchen. So she's cooking a meal. And she gets these carrots and she starts chopping the carrots. But what she does is she always, it could be fish actually, I'm terrible at telling stories, sorry about that, but it could be fish, but we'll stick with the carrots. And she tops and tails them. But rather than topping and tailing them like just a couple of centimetres at each end, she actually cuts so that there is about 5 centimetres left in the middle of the carrot. So she ends up cutting just 5 centimetre chunks of carrot and chucking the rest away, throwing it all away, puts it in the pan, starts to cook it. And it suddenly occurred to her, why am I wasting all this carrot? It's 2019, we're told that the majority of the vegetable is good for you, we really need to get rid of the green bit on the end, so why not save it? So she says to her mum, why, you always told me to top and tail carrots like this, but why do we cut so much off? And her mum says, I don't know. My mum always did it that way when she taught me. So she said, well, go and ring your gran up, see what she says. So she jumped on the phone and said to her gran, look, Gran, why did you do this with the carrots? Why did you teach my mum to throw so much of the carrot away? Why didn't you use most of it? Because you weren't very well off. You could have fed more of the family. And the gran says, I don't know, my mum taught me how to do it that way. So your great gran, she's obviously still here, so go and have a word with her. So they went round to great granny, who must be about 102 years old at this point, and said, great grandmama, as they called her, why did you teach my gran, excuse me, voice is going, why did you teach her to top and tail carrots like this and throw so much of it away and not use the most of the carrot? And she said, it's a funny thing. She said, when I first started cooking, we were quite poor and I only had a tiny little pan and I couldn't afford another pan. So I used to do that so that I could fit the carrots in the pan, and that's why we do it. Obviously the conclusion to that story is that sometimes, and this happens in the workplace as well, sometimes we do things and we don't actually question why we do it. We just do it because it's always been done that way, or we've been shown how to do it that way, and people either don't have time or they just haven't been bothered to, or they haven't got round to it to think about why we do it. So anyway, but very long-winded story, apologise for that, but hopefully I've made my point that what I didn't want to do was just look at what YouTubers were doing. Yeah, by all means, I want as much advice as I could possibly get, but I wanted to see if I could find where the source of this information came from. Where, who is saying that we need to feed our orchids with supplements of calcium and magnesium? Why do we do this? I knew in my own mind that there was probably a really good source of it, but I wanted to see where it was coming from. So I thought, okay, well, let's see if we can find some credible sources. Now, I'm not saying YouTubers aren't credible. Of course they are. They're incredible. But I wanted some scientific sources. And actually, I can't find any. Hardly any. So in the absence of a lot of... Well, I did find one, which I'll come to in a minute. But in the absence of lots of scientific sources, I thought, right, well, I'll look down the list of Google search results and see which ones I think are likely to be more credible than others. So first one I came across is the North of England Orchid Society, of which I'm a member. I thought, well, I understand the North of England Orchid Society is the oldest orchid society in the world, so that's a lot of growing experience. I mean, there's probably 1,000 years of experience in every meeting I go to, without being disparaging to the members there, of which I'm adding 51 years. So I thought, right, well, I'll have a look at their website. Looked up the feeding on their website, and this is, and I quote, what the North of England Orchid Society say on feeding orchids. Orchids are notoriously weak feeders, and a solution of 1/4 to half a strength fertiliser is all that most plants will need. So, in their wisdom, the North of England Orchid Society recommends that it doesn't even say that you use an orchid feed, it's just an ordinary plant food, and you just use 1/4 to half a strength of that fertiliser. No mention of calcium and magnesium, no mention of anything else, except that they are weak feeders. Okay, so I'll keep that in mind. Next one. Royal Horticultural Society, the RHS. Again, world famous, extremely credible, very scientific in their approach. This is what they had to say. Orchids are not generally heavy feeders. And then it goes on to say, feed with a liquid orchid fertiliser every 3rd watering during the growing season. That's it. Nothing else. Okay, so far we've established that they're weak feeders, and you don't even need an orchid fertiliser. Any fertiliser will do, as long as you feed it very, very weakly. A phrase that cropped up quite a lot was, feed them weekly, as in W-E-A-K, weekly, and then every 7 days. So then we got on to the American Orchid Society, which had a little bit more information. I've got a few little nuggets from them. So they say, and I quote, use any fertiliser you would use for other container plants. So that's backing up what both the RHS and the North of England Orchid Society are saying. Any fertiliser. And I recall Ed saying about somebody using Fostrogen, which is antimatter feed. That was another one that he mentioned. He said use 1/4 strength. It also says you would do far better to feed with too little than with too much. So far we're getting like a picture that orchids don't feed that much, you don't need anything special, and you're better off actually feeding them less than you are feeding them more. Okay, they also added that you want to choose a fertiliser with no urea in, and that popped up quite a bit. I'm not sure why that would be in there, unless you put it in yourself. And then it said you should water first and then feed with a solution. Now that cropped up a couple of times, that you shouldn't just feed with water already containing the food. You should actually water them through, flush them through first, and then feed them. Now I must confess that's not something I'm doing, and frankly that sounds like a huge faff, and it's not something that I think I'm going to be doing in the future, unless somebody can prove to me that it makes a huge difference. Okay, who else did I find? It might not sound that credible. Orchids for Dummies. That's me, yeah, Orchids for Dummies. Now actually the author of this particular Orchids for Dummies book did have some credibility. He was somebody who was big in the growing world. And this guy says, use a general fertilizer. Says, but in most cases, a fertilizer with supplementary calcium and magnesium is a real plus. So that's twice I've heard this calcium and magnesium mentioned. So obviously that's something that seems to be cropping up quite a bit. But I still want to know where that's come from. Where's the science behind it? So let's get back to my tale. So I've said a little bit on the research, where I got some research from. Okay, so I then went back to our friend Rick. Now, Rick L. Orchids, and I just want to mention, by the way, I believe he's not very well, and I just want to send him and everybody else my best wishes. So just to reiterate, this is in no way a criticism of anybody. This is just where I'm up to, thinking about it. And frankly, you know, when I watch Rick's videos, he's way ahead of me, and he understands it far better than I probably will for quite a while yet. But I just want to kind of tell you the timeline and the progression of where I'm up to. So I had another look at Rick's stuff. Now, Rick says quite openly that he got a lot of his information from the St. Augustine Orchid Society website. And he also says, you know, the feeding of orchids is very often dependent on what you can see and the feedback you get from the plants, and it's very difficult to just give a blanket answer to feed them this and then that's it, which really is what we're all hoping for, isn't it? Well, anyway, so I went on to the St. Augustine Orchid Society website, and it appears that all the information on there, and there seems to be more information on their website than on any other Orchid Society websites. They're really big on it. They in turn got all their information, and here's the first little bit of scientific backup here. They got it from an article which was actually serialized in a magazine publication in 2002 from a PhD guy called Bill Argo. So I had a look at this article. So any information that Rick got and any information that St. Augustine Orchid Society have got on their website comes from this single article. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just pointing out that we've finally got a little bit of scientific backup here. Some research that he did for Michigan State University, and it was actually to create a general purpose feed, which strangely enough wasn't for orchids. And he says at the end of his article that the formulae that are now available under the MSU, I guess it's a brand now, are for any container plants, not just orchids. So I think very often we, as orchid growers, and I'm putting myself in that category now, even though I'm a new orchid grower, we very often like to think that, you know, there's something special and something different to everything else, and there may well be something special, but in terms of the nutrients they need, they're pretty much like every other plant. You know, when I go out and feed plants in my garden, I don't separate out different, you know, ones that need this food and that food. So, and as we've seen from the quotes that we've done so far, a lot of these credible sources are just talking about general purpose fertilizers. So yeah, so anyway, I get back to the story. So this article by Bill Argo, I did plough through it, but I have to confess, you know, he's a PhD in this stuff, and this is proper scientific data, and I simply didn't understand the majority of it. You know, it's I don't think it's because I'm not too bright. I think it's mainly because that, you know, it's a specialised subject, and this was proper research. But there were one or two things that we could pick up from it. So at the end of his article, he talks about the product that has come from this research, this MSU magic fertilizer, in quotations. And he does say there's nothing actually magic about it. He says that to choose which of these 5 formulae that would be correct for your particular orchids, or any plants for that matter, that you're feeding in a container, it depends totally on the quality of the water that you're putting it in. So that takes things to a slightly different twist now. So now we're talking about, well, I can't just pick a feed. I've got to decide on the quality of my water first before I then choose the formula that goes with it. And on the St. Augustine website, there are 1 or 2 charts that show you which of these formula, or which kind of a feed formula you should choose based on the quality of your water. Now, if we're talking about quality of water, how do you choose? Well, they then start to talk about the alkalinity of the water, and they'll give you some different formula based on the alkalinity of your water. Now, this is not to be confused with water pH, and this is the mistake I made, and I think lots of other people, because I've seen lots of other people testing the pH and telling you should get a pH meter and so on and so forth, which I dutifully did. But to decide, and maybe that's for something else, or maybe I've completely misunderstood why we're all testing the pH of the water. I understood it to be you should keep the pH of your water below 7 and above 5, and then everything will be great. Now that may be the case, but certainly on this article anyway, if we're talking about the alkalinity of the water, that's different to the pH, and you can only test the alkalinity of the water by sending your water to a lab, which I'm very disinclined to do. However, there is a shortcut. If you use RO water or rainwater, which I guess this is why people do this, I always wondered why, that is, by definition, has low alkalinity in it. Okay, so we'll move that on. The somewhat humorously named Sue Bottoms, who's also on the St. Augustine Orchid Society website, who also used the Bill Argo information from 2002. She does a chart, and she then does some recommendations for feeding based on that article. And if you're using RO water or rainwater, she then says that calcium should be given as a supplement from 40 to 80 parts per million, and the magnesium should be given as a supplement 20 to 40 parts per million respectively. And if we just go over here to my feeding of nutrients regime, you'll see that I'm doing, little flies in my eyes there, full flush, CalMag plus feed, then magnesium plus feed. We've got just calcium on its own, calcium nitrate plus feed, then CalMag again, then just magnesium plus feed. So what I'm actually doing there is I'm trying to cover all my bases. Okay, I'm trying to say, look, I know they need a general purpose fertilizer, so I do that. And I know that they need magnesium, and I know that they need calcium, and sometimes CalMag might not be enough, so sometimes I just do magnesium and feed, sometimes I just do calcium and feed. Whether that's right or not remains to be seen. So that's where I kind of come round full circle to drawing some kind of conclusion from this limited research that I've done. So in order to find which fertilizer to use, you're going to need to either know the alkalinity of your water, and then go to the St. Augustine Orchid, it's a mouthful that, St. Augustine Orchid Society website, and look at the charts and it'll tell you exactly which. If you don't know what the alkalinity is, you can't test it with a pH, you've got to send it to a lab, or there might be some information on your local authority website or the water website, that tells you what your what the alkalinity is. But you can get around that by using rainwater or RO water. And if you do that, then so long as you supplement with calcium and magnesium, you should be okay. But, and here's really, because I was already doing that, here's really the biggest thing that I take from this, and that I'm probably overfeeding. So I'm going to reduce the feed and see what happens. And I'm probably not flushing enough. So I'm going to increase the flushes. So I'm going to try and flush at least twice a month, 2 weeks out of 4. And I'm only going to feed 2 weeks out of 4 and see what happens. And I'm completely guilty of this, probably like lots of other people, in that we all like to think that if anything's going wrong, some elixir of orchid feed will put things right. And as I came across over and over and over again, orchids don't feed that much anyway. They don't take in that many nutrients anyway, and you can actually do more harm than good by giving them too much. So that's how I'm going to change what I do. But I did come across one more thing. I'll try and wrap this up soon because I know I've been going on for quite a long time, and what I'll do is I'll just swing you around to look at something else for a bit. I hope you've managed to stick with me so far. So you might have to make another cup of coffee actually. I'll put you on this as I go for a little bit. So also on the St. Augustine Orchid Society website, there's a guy called Roy Tokunaga, who apparently has been in orchids all his life and he's worked with a lot of orchid growers, and he said, and this is probably something we all need to take a little bit more into account, instead of trying to rely on feed all the time, that all great orchid growers focus on these things, and the number one thing is, have a guess, can you guess? It's light. Not sun, but just light. We all know that, direct sun through glass is a dangerous thing, but get them in a nice bright place and that makes all the difference. I'll read through the list. Aeration, so that's air movement around the leaves, is also highly important. And in fact, even though I have one fan, I'm going to try and get my other fan to come on as well. I'm going to change that a little bit because I was only having it coming on about 18 degrees, and I think really during the day I need it on more than that. So I'm going to change that. Number 3 was day and nighttime temperatures. They like at least a 10 to 30 degree change. I'm not sure that's Celsius. Yeah, it must be, mustn't it? So 10 to it can't be 30 degree change Celsius. I don't know. Somebody will have to chip in with that one. But obviously they're going to need a temperature change. I would have thought. If it goes down to 12 Celsius, I'm not very good with Fahrenheit. If it goes down to 12 Celsius during the night, yes, it would be great to go up to 22. But I would have thought another 30 degrees on top of that is going to kill them all. So maybe that's Fahrenheit. Now in this case, I can't do anything about this. I've tried putting the heater on to increase the temperature, but I got absolutely, hit with a massive electricity bill. It really changed my electricity bill, so I can't afford it. So during the winter months, unless it's a sunny day, they're going to have to make do with 12 degrees, unfortunately. Number 4 was to avoid temperature extremes. Number 5 was vigilance on pests and diseases. Yeah, obviously, pick your plants up a lot and you can see what's going on with them. That will help to keep them healthy. Number 6 was low salt levels. So that comes back to the flushing, which I have to confess I don't do enough, so I'm definitely going to change that. And number 7 was the media pH. Not the pH of the water that's going in, the pH of your media. Now, perhaps somebody can help me with that one, because I've no idea how you measure the pH of your media. I wouldn't have thought it's just a case of pouring water through and then measuring the water. I don't know. Between 5 to 6.5, he says. So they are the 7 things that he says are the most important things. He's not mentioned feeding there, has he? He's also not mentioned something that a lot of us have spent a lot of time and money trying to get right. The humidity. These foggers cost hundreds and hundreds of pounds, and frankly mine's hardly ever on, because certainly this time of year the humidity's high anyway, and in the summer I tended to switch it off, which is, I know that's a bit bizarre because it needs the humidity when the sun comes out, but I was finding that it was just running out so quickly and I just couldn't keep up with it. So, and because I've only got it like in a tank, it's not fed from the mains and too far from the mains. But according to Roy Tokunaga, that's not one of the 7 most important things. And I did read somewhere else where somebody actually compared humidity to ventilation, aeration, and said that humidity doesn't matter half as much as people think, whereas air movement does. So whether this has thrown any light on it for anybody, whether it's helped anybody change their practices, this is what I found. I'm not saying I'm right, that's just where I'm up to with it. And I would love to hear from people to see whether they've got some other source that they can tell me about. And this is going to be, this kind of discussion one is going to be something I'm going to do quite regularly. I'm going to call it a grab a coffee and let's discuss series. So I have got a question for you today, and my question of the day is, gosh, them cat ears are suffering a little bit now after being bashed about in the post. My question of the day is there any other credible source of information on how to feed orchids out there? And by credible, I don't just mean a really good YouTuber or a good blog post writer or a good commercial article trying to flog you the particular formula. I'm talking about somebody that has some science behind them, some scientific evidence, some data. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I'd like to see. I can't believe that Bill Argo's very good article, excellent article in my very humble opinion, is the only thing that's out there since 2002. I'm sure there must be something more up to date. But I've got an honourable mention as well, the First Rays website. There's a guy on there that does a really good article on how he changed how his orchids performed. But then he goes on, because obviously he's selling the First Rays product, which may be fantastic, but it is also based on Bill Argo's research, which might be the definitive research. I don't know. This is all I'm asking. Is there anything else? It'll be interesting to see if there is anything else out there, or if anybody has another source somewhere, just to see whether there's another take on it, or is this it? Have we found the golden chalice? Is that the word? The definitive version of how we feed orchids. So basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to carry on feeding with the general purpose orchid feed, and I'm just going to keep supplementing with CalMag occasionally, sometimes magnesium, sometimes calcium, but I'm going to do it less than I've been doing so far. I'm going to do it quite sparingly, and I'm going to try and put much more attention into getting those other 7 aspects right and my priority at the moment is light, because I don't feel my orchids are getting anywhere near enough light, and I think that's going to be the next thing to save up for. Some of these decent, not the blurple ones, some of these decent full spectrum sunlight lamps that I can put up here, and try and increase my day length. I'll try and give them, get them out of the shade if that's what they want. So that's it. It's a long one, 36 minutes. I apologise for that. I hope it made some kind of sense. I hope we've not got anybody jumping up and down, throwing things at the computers and the phones, and I hope people have actually managed to stick this long. I probably would have done. I watched Roger for this length of time. I watched some of the others for this length of time. I used to watch everything that Rick did. So hopefully, people are stuck with it. And don't forget the question of the day. What other sources have you managed to find? Anybody got anything else to throw in there? I'll be very willing to, read and look it up. So that's it. Anyway, okay. So I'll just swizz you around. Okay, so my voice needs a rest now, so I will hopefully see you on the next one. If you enjoyed that, or you want to see more and hear more in the future, please like and subscribe and share it with your friends and your neighbours who like plants. And I apologise, by the way, for the per one that's coming out probably before this one. No, that can't be right, because yeah, it is before this one. So I apologise for the per one. The sound was horrendous, but only probably near the beginning. It was very windy outside. But if you stick with it, then you do find out actually in the end how to ripen a pear. I should have just gone straight for it, shouldn't I, and give you the thing, as it were. So that's it, and hopefully I'll see you on the next one. Bye.